Now we must analyze and interpret the short story Cat in the Rain by Ernest Hemingway. And let us work out the strategy for understanding, analysis, and interpretation. Consider the historical and cultural context. Generate inferences insightfully from the text. Get engaged with the text and apply various strategies. Identify the problem the author is trying to resolve. Identify the concepts the author uses or develops. Identify the relationship between the main point and the supporting points. Identify deeper implications insightfully from the text. Focus on literary and language means. About the author, about Ernest Hemingway. The biography of a legendary and timeless American writer, Ernest Hemingway, was full of adventures, hunting trips, bullfighting, fishing, and war. He was involved in the First and the Second World Wars, made 4 trips to Spain in the midst of civil war. Together with his first wife, he traveled widely, including 1 trip to Africa, where they were injured in 2 plane crashes. The sensations he experienced in his lifetime are depicted in many of his literary works. The early part of Hemingway's career was devoted to journalism. He was employed as a reporter for a leading newspaper in Kansas City and in Paris as a foreign correspondent. While staying in Paris, Hemingway and his wife Hadley Richardson lived in Paris from 1921 to 1926. He became acquainted with outstanding writers and public figures, Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound, Scott Fitzgerald, who encouraged him to publish his first important collection of stories in our time. The following year, he published his famous novel The Sun Also Rises, which deals with the post-war lost generation. His other famous works, A Farewell to Arms, Death in the Afternoon, Winner Take Nothing, Green Hills of Africa, following in the years from 1926 to 1933, already established his literary fame. In 1940 was published For Whom the Bell Tolls, a serious and politically motivated novel. The Old Man and the Sea was written in Cuba in 1951 and was published in 1952. On the 2nd of July in 1961, his depressive thoughts led him to a suicide, and Ernest Hemingway took his life with a shotgun. Many people all over the world still hold the opinion that there has been no American writer like Ernest Hemingway. And now about the story itself, about Cat in the Rain. The surface level of the story is quite plain and simple. The story is about an American couple that spends their holidays in an Italian hotel. The American woman's husband, George, is reading all the time. The wife sees a cat in the rain and wants to get it. At the end of the story, there is a knock on the door, and the maid stands there holding a cat for the American woman in her hands. Behind this deceptively simple story, the reader can draw deeper implications and inferences from the text. And now, culture point, lost generation. This term is believed to be coined by Gertrude Stein, a well-known public figure. "You're all a lost generation," she said, speaking to Hemingway. It was in regular use after the First World War, in reference to the young generation, disillusioned, morally and spiritually waste. The mood of disenchantment and cynicism of the lost generation was presented in many literary works. So the lost generation is a term used to refer to the generation that came of age during the First World War. The term was popularized by Ernest Hemingway, who used it as one of the 2 contrasting epigraphs for his novel, The Sun Also Rises. In that volume, Hemingway credits the phrase to Gertrude Stein, who was then his mentor and patron. In A Movable Feast, which was published after Hemingway and Stein had a famous feud and fallen apart, and indeed after they were both dead, Hemingway reveals that the phrase was actually originated by the garage owner who serviced Stein's car. When a young mechanic failed to repair the car in a way satisfactory to Stein, the owner shouted at her, "You're all a generation perdue, lost." Stein, in telling Hemingway the story, added, "That is what you are. That's what you all are. All of you young people who served in the war. You're a lost generation." The term lost generation clearly, as seen from the original quote as reported by Hemingway, refers to his generation, those who were members of the age classes called to duty in the Great War. This generation included distinguished artists such as Ernest Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, Thomas Eliot, Erich Maria Remarque, and many others. Now, let us do some reading between lines. There were only 2 Americans stopping at the hotel. They did not know any of the people they passed on the stairs on their way to and from their room. What are the word "only" in the opening paragraph emphasized in the story? Their room was on the 2nd floor, facing the sea. It also faced the public garden and the war monument. There were big palms and green benches in the public garden. Across the square in the doorway of the cafe, a waiter stood looking out at the empty square. In your opinion, why are 2 Americans stopping at the hotel? Do the public garden, war monument, and empty square symbolize anything? The American wife stood at the window looking out. Outside, right under their window, a cat was crouched under one of the dripping green tables. Why does the author call the main character the American wife? Why is not she given a name? She went over and sat in front of the mirror of the dressing table, looking at herself with a hand glass. She studied her profile, first one side and then the other. Then she studied the back of her head and her neck. "Don't you think it would be a good idea if I let my hair grow out?" she asked, looking at her profile again. Why does the American wife want to change her hairstyle? And now check your comprehension, critical thinking, and interpretation. Comment upon the title. Explain why the story is called The Cat in the Rain. Is the story about a cat? Hemingway makes emphasis on the weather in the opening paragraph. Does it have any symbolic meaning? What does rain symbolize in the story? Can you remember literary works or films where rain stands for something else? Why does the hotel keeper make the American wife feel very small and at the same time really important? Why does the American wife like the hotel keeper? Does the maid's question to the American wife, "Have you lost something, ma'am?" have symbolic implication? Why does the author make his character, George, speak so little? Why is he always reading? Is he intellectual? Can you detect what the American wife experiences? What can you call this state? Is she disillusioned? Does she feel emotional and spiritual estrangement from her husband? Is there unbridgeable distance between them? What does the cat symbolize in the story?